Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our inaugural Sponsor Pulse webinar, Sponsorship Decisions Simplified. My name is Eddie Sidani, and I am the Manager of Brand and Partnerships here at Sponsor Pulse, and I'll be your host for the next 45 minutes. If you have any questions throughout the course of the webinar, please feel free to type them in the Q&A area at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to get to them in our Q&A session immediately following the presentation. Also, we'll be recording today's session and posting it online to our website so that you can refer back to it at any time in the future. You'll be able to find the recording and other sponsorship insights at www.sponsorpulse.com. I'd now like to introduce today's presenter and Sponsor Pulse's Chief Revenue Officer, Neil Covant. Neil, over to you, my friend.
All right. I'm hoping that the video is working. I got lights on me, so forgive me if I start to squint. As Eddie mentioned, thank you all for coming and being a part of our inaugural webinar for Sponsor Pulse. A little bit of housekeeping before we dive in, and there's a lot to kind of talk about and digest throughout the presentation, so we'll be quick on the housekeeping. All of the data that you're about to see in the case studies come from IMI's Sponsor Pulse product and platform. Sponsor Pulse was created in 2018, and since its inception, we've talked to every single month thousands of different consumers across 18 countries with hundreds of different platforms in which we talk to them about from a categorical perspective. 19 million data points every month when we're speaking to consumers. And the beauty of the actual product is in the platform, it really is all about consumers. It's one common currency to help simplify sponsorship decision-making platform and decision-making process. So as you'll see, and as you'll see it brought to life throughout the presentation, you'll see that there really is, while a lot of noise in the landscape, there is a way to simplify it with the right data at the right time. And that's what Sponsor Pulse is here to do and provide. So without further ado, let's dive into the presentation. We're going to start with a really quick 101 on why sponsorship. And I know that probably most of us on this webinar right now kind of know why sponsorship, which is why we're here. But you'd be surprised on how many different calls we get every week that just looking for insights on sponsorships and to demonstrate the strengths and the benefits of sponsorships to either potential prospects or even to the higher ups who just want to know and understand what the value is behind sponsorship. So really quick synopsis of why sponsorship and a quick 101. The first and probably one of the most important things about sponsorship is to know that from a conversion perspective and impact perspective, it works. Globally, almost half of consumers in the past year have purchased a product as a result of that brand or product being a part of or sponsoring and associating itself with a property. Strong across the board, particularly in North America, Europe, Australia, and the rest of the world. But again, you see even in Asia, 30%, so 1 in 3 being converted to actually buy something as a result of sponsorship. The other question we get posed with a lot is, during the pandemic, has sponsorship seen a downturn? Obviously, there was some disruption in properties and properties not being able to go out and actually be live, and even to some extent being able to play on field. We actually have seen maintenance from a sponsorship impact potential. So pre-pandemic, when we measured whether or how impactful sponsorship was, it was at 49% globally. And then now this slide I just showed you, it's at 47%. So no change in the actual impact of sponsorship over the course of the pandemic from pre-pandemic up until May, which is just a couple months ago. One of the reasons why we've seen sponsorship being able to sustain its strength is because of how it works and why it works so well. So if you look at one of the things we have seen growth in, it really is about brands supporting at a community level and that one-to-one engagement from a passion point perspective. So it went from 48% pre-pandemic on that front to 57% now. Local community and connectiveness really being at its pinnacle in which we've seen it, always strong relative to other tactics and strategies, but probably at one of the strongest it's been since we've been measuring it, which is probably 20 years. Which fits perfectly into the benefits of why sponsorship and where sponsorship sweet spot really is. If you hold sponsorship up to a mass campaign, and again, there's exceptions to every rule, but if you hold it up to a mass campaign, traditionally what you'll see is from an awareness perspective, sponsorship is not going to be the front runner relative to a mass traditional campaign. So mass traditional campaign does have the ability to kind of blanket the overall marketplace and get the word out from an awareness perspective. But as we all know, when you start to work your way down the funnel, before you can even get into driving purchasing, there's comprehension. So there's the ability to actually communicate what you're trying to do, who you are, and what your brand benefits are. That's where sponsorship starts to really separate itself from more traditional or other media tactics, in its ability to communicate the finer benefits of why I'm here and what I'm doing from a brand level and even a property level. That then funnels down into conversion on impact, where sponsor, and you'll see here sponsorship being the green bar, and traditional mass being the black bar. That's where sponsorship really does start to separate itself. And it all stems from that emotional connection piece that we talked about earlier, the connectiveness into the community, the connectiveness on a passion point, and that's something people care about. Getting them to kind of lean in a little bit stronger and listen to what you're saying, versus simply just being aware overall as a proxy, and then ultimately changing the way they feel about you or how they act toward you behaviorally, and starting to purchase you more because of that message reception that you were able to communicate. That's the strength and the sweet spot of sponsorship. We know this from an activation perspective. And again, we're going quickly through this slide, but this is an important takeaway. And I think we all probably know it by now, and everybody says it and everybody's doing it from an, activation. When you start to activate, that's where you really maximize sponsorship's potential. So taking something from just an association, I'm here, I'm part of the property, or the property is a part of me, those types of things, to actually demonstrating your fandom and connection, and then bringing it from a consumer perspective back to actually bringing it to life and celebrating with consumers. So that's what true activation is, and that's really where we hit our stride from a sponsorship potential. Now, again, we all know and have been saying for quite some time, activation works, and you need to activate to engage. One of the things we're going to walk you through as we start to go through the presentation isn't just about the benefit of activation, but it's making sure your activation is done right, and connecting on the most salient parts of the passion points from a fan perspective, or an attendee perspective, or an engaged-based perspective. Okay, so again, really high level on why sponsorship. Maybe some of it motherhood, but I guarantee that some will be downloading this to be able to show it and demonstrate it to their bosses, or bosses' bosses, or even prospects and potential partners. So let's get into the fun stuff and why we're all here, and start to talk about the sponsorship journey. We get it. It's noisy. We've been doing this. I personally have been doing this for 20 years, this being measuring and evaluating and consulting from a sponsorship perspective. We've been able to work with both the property and the client side, as well as the agency side. So we're hearing it from all angles. That makes us, or gets us, privy to some of the discussions that are happening, and we have an ear to the ground on kind of what's being discussed and what's getting in the way of sponsorship decision making. So if you look at some of what we put together in terms of conversations we've had and things we frequently hear day to day, month to month, those types of things, I was going to animate each one of these things. I'm not going to do that for the audience because it would probably take too long, but let's just walk through it. And I almost guarantee that there's probably going to be some nodding heads as we go through this. As you step back and think about it, and it doesn't matter if you're a property or a client side or an agency, but you think about your decision making, and you think about what you're going to do next and where you're going to go next. And I guarantee you start to hear or see or think about a lot of these things. So there's contending news and views, contending data overload, just being too much data, maybe sometimes even talking about different things, and confusion from that part. There's hearing parts of the story and stepping back and saying, well, is there more to it, and trying to find that right data and insight to give you that conclusive kind of 360 degrees versus just the 180. There's fear of missing out, your competitors or other brands within your category being somewhere that you're not. There's fear of being involved. We made up a couple of these acronyms, the next two for sure. Fear of being involved. So am I at the right place in the right time, talking to the consumers that matter? Fear of too much invested. That's probably something that's pretty common to majority of us on the webinar right now is, I know what I'm spending, and is it too much? I can't really seem to find any information out there of what competitors spend and those types of things, which will lead to an uncertainty. And then we know, and this was probably more true in the past than it is today, but it still exists, where the CEO's kid plays a sport, and the CEO is just like, you know what, we got to be in this because little Jimmy loves softball, and here we go. And then they're second guessing. So looking back at everything and thinking about, Am I in the right place? Is there something else I can be doing? What are my competitors doing? Those types of things. So that's a lot, and that's a lot to deal with as you're starting to decide not only which properties or brands you're going to associate your property with or your brand with, but also in terms of how you're going to do it properly, how you're going to break through, and how you're going to be successful. So that is why we launched Sponsor Pulse. And again, going back to 2018, we've been tracking and trending data across 18 countries with consumers. And really, it was to simplify the journey, to take all that noise we just saw and bring it down and really make it easy and simple to digest and understand and help you plan across the journey by taking it back to one voice, and the voice that really, at the end of the day, is going to matter most to your brand or your property, which is the consumer, the everyday person. That's our one voice. That's our common currency. And we measure everything, be it sport, cause, culture, event, right down to a local level, across that same consumer and across the same metrics, okay? So from a platform perspective, and the reason we're going to talk about this is because it's all going to come to life as you start to see the case studies and the insights and the data. But essentially, we look at 7 key metrics which ladder up to an opportunity score. That opportunity score being from a client side or from an agency side, from a property side perspective, how big is the opportunity of this particular partnership or platform or property, and where is it getting its strength? So the where it's getting its strength comes from starting point of engagement, intensity, and momentum. So from an engagement perspective, it's reach. Intensity is how frequently that reach happens. Momentum is how much it's growing in its reach and intensity. Then you get down to the emotional connection piece, which is obviously critical, and you start talking about people's passion, people being consumers, passion and excitement towards the property. And then you get down to the sponsorship side of things, which is impact on brand favorability or brand opinion change and purchase consideration. So all of these metrics were thought through because all of them are critical in that decision-making process, but we don't need 20 more, okay? So we need the 7 right ones, which is just enough to be able to simplify what we're doing and lean into the system that's going to work to get us there. All of these ladder up to the opportunity score, which at the end of the day is a culmination of all of those metrics and tells you the absolute strength of the property. So that's, again, the reason why we're talked about that and are bringing that to life is because now hopefully the rest of the webinar is going to make sense as we start to bring about the case studies that get us there. And we're going to take you through the process. And again, from a process perspective, the buckets are probably very familiar. We all know planning, we all know investment, we all know demonstrating, and we all know the learning and optimization side. What becomes a challenge is within each one of those buckets, it becomes so turbulent. Like all those noise points we just pointed out to you earlier on, they all take place at every step of the way. So we're going to walk you through the planning process and how to kind of reduce or turn down that volume of the noise and really focus on what's right for your brand, what's right for your property, and what's right for your agency or your clients. We're going to go from planning to investing. So planning is, there's thousands of opportunities. I need to cull it down to a list that's going to be the right one for my brand and is much less than thousands. Then there's the investment side, which is, okay, I've picked a handful of them. Which one am I going to spend my money on? And how am I going to know which or the right amount of money to spend in order to achieve my objectives? Then there's demonstrating. So now we've decided to invest a property in a brand, and the agency working with both has kind of gotten, and we put together a deal and we start to roll things out. But now we need to understand whether or not it's working and what's working best. So it's not just enough to understand, is it working? It's what specifically is working about it, and what can I do to make it work a little bit harder and better going forward? And that brings us to the learning stage and the optimization stage, which is taking all of those learnings and understanding what we need to do from a growth perspective to strengthen our connection and strengthen our association. So we're now going to walk through each one of those phases, bring them to life in terms of the decision-making process, and give you some tips that hopefully you can take back in a way that's going to help you kind of strategize and do things easier and quicker and better going forward. So let's start with planning and dive into some case studies. First case study, one of my personal favorites, the Paul brothers. So for those who don't know, and hopefully neither Jake or his brother Paul, or I think that's, I don't forgot his name, but neither of hopefully Jake or Logan are here on the webinar. because I find them pretty obnoxious, but nonetheless, they're out there since 2019. They've become professional quote unquote boxers. And Contending Industry News and Views says that if you look at any one source in any one day, you're either going to hear these guys suck and they're killing the sport of boxing, or you're going to hear from sources like Mike Tyson, yeah, these guys are annoying and obnoxious, but you know what? They're helping the sport of boxing and they're actually growing it in a time where UFC is kind of kicking our butts. So without having that consumer context or understanding of what's really going on, you don't know which way to lean. So we've actually been measuring again since 2018 boxing, and then in 2019 looking at the strength of boxing and where it was. And from those kind of different metrics that I talked about earlier, engagement, passion, and purchase considerations, so just picking the three, since 2019, which is when the Logan brothers made their appearance and started training hard and eating their vitamins and doing those types of things, there has been significant growth in boxing. And again, without understanding and trending and looking at things from the same lens, which is the consumer lens, we wouldn't know and truly realize that boxing has grown. But it's not enough that something's been growing and gained momentum. One of the things as a brand we need to step back and obviously understand is it growing in the right places with the right people that are going to help my brand? So if you look at who boxing's really grown with and who has the most intense following, I don't know if it would be a surprise or not to know that where growth is coming from is white males who are millennials and high income. So kind of Paul Brothers sweet spot. So if that target is for your brand, now you can have two check marks to say it's growing. It's an area that there seems to be more passion and excitement. It's not growing just on people looking for what's going on with the Paul brothers. They are genuinely excited, but this is who that excitement is coming from. So is that the right target in which I want to associate my brand with and go after? If it is, another check mark. If it's not, now at least we have that information at our fingertips to be able to understand, you know what, it might not be an area where I want to start to play in. The next noisy part is parts of the story. The pandemic has been hugely disruptive, and I personally, and I guarantee all of us, cannot wait until we're truly at the other end of it. But throughout it, you hear, you know, what's going on from a mental health perspective, and then you see articles and news about how we're coping with it. So this is just one of many that talked about Canadians coping with it in ways that are not very constructive. Increasing cannabis usage, alcohol usage, gambling, medication, those types of things, and probably the wrong medications. But again, you start to hear about how we're dealing with it and the kind of spiral that's happening. But if you step back, yes, that might be happening, but let's actually understand what else is happening and perhaps what's happening in a constructive way, because there is lots. If you look in North America, you know what else has grown? Not just kind of alcohol consumption, but mental health and research and support. People going out and seeking CAMH and other organizations to help them through the mental issues and mental health that they're going through at the time of the pandemic, which we are all in need of, me personally, and I guarantee all of us here. So that's something else we're doing that's very constructive. And as a brand, you start to think about, and again, it's probably no surprise, mental health being something that would be something we would want to associate ourselves with, but it's seeing gains in momentum, and it's the right type of gains in momentum. The other thing we look at is not only just mental health overall, but then you step back and say, okay, yes, mental health is a big concern, but what can we associate our brand with that can actually help or does help to some degree alleviate that mental health? And it is support, but it's also fun and comedy and laughter. So when you look back at some of the comedy festivals from around the world, we're seeing significant momentum in people's intention to and interest in these festivals, and for them to get back so that they can laugh and they can be a part of these experiences. So again, another area where perhaps maybe we weren't thinking of, but one that's really relevant, which is critical at this time, so at the right time, and looking at data that supports that and gets us to that point. The other thing we're doing more of is exercising and eating right, doing yoga at home and those types of ways. So again, other areas that are still within, to some degree, mental health, but they're tactical ways to really help alleviate and be a part of alleviating mental health through things like comedy, through things like eating right, nutrition, and through things like exercise and physical activity. Which brings us to our next point of noise. And I apologize if I'm going quickly. There is a lot to get through, but I'll slow down a little bit because this is where it gets really tricky, is how many hundreds of thousands of different properties there are around the world that are sports, music, cause, culture, entertainment, lifestyle, festivals, local festivals, grassroots, all those types of things. Globally, in the 18 countries that we measure or have within the platform of Sponsor Pulse, billions of people follow any one of these things. That's a lot of noise. You sit back as a brand, even in just one of these regions, and say, okay, I want to get into entertainment and lifestyle. Where do I go? And then all of a sudden you have hundreds and maybe thousands of different property ideas hitting you in the kind of head. So you have to step back and say, which is the right one for me and for my consumer and my objective? Which brings us to our next few case studies and bringing the Sponsor Pulse and the simplicity of it to life. If you're a bank in the US, what we have, and again, everything we have is critical in the decision-making process. So we have it for a reason, and it's the reason is because it's what you need to look at to get you through to that next step of investment, which I promise we're going to get there as well. But if you look at the opportunity score and the greater opportunity of all the thousands of different properties we have in our platform and in our database amongst those people who are in the market for financial services. So if I'm a bank, I'm looking at my best potential prospect and customers. You automatically see the list of the top 12 or 15. And the next 12 or 15 might also be great opportunities. The 12 or 15 after that might also be good opportunities. But the bottom of those ones are probably not as good opportunities. So again, we're in planning stage and culling a list of, potentially hundreds down to a handful or tens. And you see things like the NFL, which, for all intents and purposes, much like the NHL here in Canada, is really going to rise to the top. But after that, there's a good mix of not just sports, but cause, culture, those types of things like recycling, goodwill, animal welfare. So within the click, we're able to see for our category, for our brand, what potentially is going to be a best next step for us to start considering. What's interesting and cool, and I think, again, we probably already know this, but to see it brought to life is pretty cool, is if you look at that same metric in the exact same way, but for a different category, beer purchasers, the list changes. NFL is still the top, but MLB wasn't on the previous list. A lot of the NCAA wasn't on the previous list, and there are more sports than cause and culture. So not all categories are created equal, and your brand and category might be a great fit for something that someone else's category and brand isn't. So we need to know that and understand before we start to decide from a property perspective too, to know where's my property going to be able to most authentically deliver for potential partners. And those are the partners that I'm going to start talking to first, because they're going to help my brand as well. But it's not enough to just say where's the best opportunity from an overall perspective. You need to also objective plan. So that's why we have the metrics that ladder in. Each one is tied to what a potential objective might be. So if you look at the automotive category, among those who are in the market, again, in the US to buy a new car or truck or SUV, you look at, if I'm in need of reach, I'm going to look for engagement. Which are the biggest properties? And that's what I'm going to start to consider first and foremost, because that's what I need to do is extend my reach and get the word out there about my brand. So you have things like the NFL, again, which, in the US is always going to show up at the top of the list. It just does. But you have other opportunities as well. The Olympics, Major League Baseball, those types of things. But what if I'm that same car brand and it isn't about reach? It's about really enhancing that love for my brand and that brand opinion and that brand enhancement. And I want to do that through a cause. So what we have available is the ability to just click on causes, and then the hundreds of causes will come out, and to click on and show me which ones are going to best drive brand love or brand favorability. Okay. And here again, you see a list, and some of these might be intuitive and others might not be. So women's domestic violence, cancer research, food for the poor, American Cancer Society, again, the top of 100, but it all of a sudden starts to really streamline your decision making and simplify it, which we're going to keep coming back to that word of simplifying it, because it's really what it's all about. To say, of all those hundreds of opportunities, here's 5 or 6 or even all 10 that I wouldn't have even considered, but they're going to work to do what I need them to do, which is change brand love and help enhance brand love. Or what if you're that same automobile company and what you say is, you know what, I need to drive and sell cars and sell test drives. So then you look at impact on consideration, which is that behavioral metric. And let's say you say, I want to do it through sport. You'll notice that this list of different properties, with again the exception of the NFL, which shows up, as a front runner in a lot of instances, when you change the look from engagement, so size and overall reach, to impact, what you start to factor in is the proportion of passionate people amongst that engaged base. And the more passionate your engaged fan base is, the stronger they will be from a front runner perspective in terms of driving and enhancing sponsorship success. So all of a sudden you see the WNBA on the list. You see women's FIFA Women's World Cup. You see NASCAR on the list. Again, you're looking at thousands of properties through one lens, which is objective based, and you're starting to uncover things that you might not have seen prior to having that one single voice perception. Okay, that's planning. Okay, so we're starting to plan. We're starting to get a sense of what we need to make sure we're looking for and doing as we're starting to plan our way through or way forward and starting to cull that list. Now we've culled that list. We have a handful of properties under consideration. That's when investment comes. Investment being, I'm going to sign the dotted line. We're going to kind of do this together and be associative together. But now there's other noises that come out that you need to navigate through. So here are some of them and some case studies that bring them to life, and some thought starters about how to navigate through that noise. The first is uncertainty. So take the WNBA, launched 25 years ago, fast forward about 10 to 15 years, so not too long ago, and you look at some of the news around the WNBA and you're hearing things like not enough interest from women. I don't think they should be paid as much as NBA players. It's not going to be as big as the NBA or other sports and those types of things. Fast forward another 10 years, and here we are today where the growth, and we're about to show you, but I think we also recognize it, of the WNBA globally has done a tremendous job over that past 25 years. And you get Tangerine, who's become the first foundational partner and stepped up in Canada and said, I want to be a part of this thing big time. So you start to look at some of those decision-making factors that lead from planning and thinking about to actually investing. If you look at the WNBA from where it is now, from an engagement perspective, there are other opportunities that are bigger from an overall fandom perspective. But you look at momentum and you look at where momentum's coming from, and it is coming globally, but you look at from a global perspective, how much the trajectory of the WNBA has changed and where it's going, you do start to see something that's growing in momentum even prior to knowing about it this year. 2 years ago, we were able to say the WNBA is growing and it's growing globally. So the next thing you look at is it right for my brand in my category? So to be able to do that, if you're an FI provider or a bank or you're Tangerine, it makes complete sense to start to think about and actually start to invest in. Engagement, momentum, excitement, passion, consideration, all strong in absolute terms, but even stronger with those who are in the market for a new credit card or a new financial service or planning service. So you see all of those factors that are starting to get me closer to, I need to actually sign and invest because it makes sense for my brand. It's a growing property. It's the right people. Now I need to start to think about how to align myself with the brand in the right way for the right amount of money. Staying the course with the NBA in basketball, there's fear of missing out. So again, I think we're all familiar with what the NBA has done at a global level and what they continue to do. So they've just announced that they put $1 billion into Africa and continuing to grow the global sport. And then Hennessy becomes the first NBA global spirits provider. So they have made that bet to go global with the league, who is going global. So you look at the NBA and it seems like a pretty good bet when you look at the NBA's intensity, strength, and impact potential for a brand globally. It's nearly always on the top of the list, certainly within the top 10 across all of these countries and the 18 countries we look for or look at. And it's kind of proved itself as taking what it's setting out to do and doing it and being advantageous from a consumer perspective on actual impact for a potential brand or sponsoring brand. So all good news, all check marks for if you're considering a global investment, the NBA is one that you certainly consider. But that doesn't mean that every single brand and category out there should consider a global investment in the NBA, because there's ones that are going to be more authentic. And from a overall opportunity score, there are categories that are just going to better represent where your consumers are, and the NBA is going to be able to deliver them. Things like sports betting, things like video games, sports drinks, cryptocurrency, which is investing huge across the world in sport, electronics, home appliances, all of those are called, all of these, I should say, are categories that index well. They are strong opportunities categories with the NBA from a global perspective. But with every list, you have your top front runners and you have the ones that are a little bit lesser. And the little bit lesser from an opportunities perspective, and there are many of them, is dairy and personal care, household product, purchasing wine, those types of things, home improvement retailer. So again, if you're a brand, if you're the NBA and you're a property, you want to go with that front list because that's going to help promote your brand because it is most authentic. If you're a brand and you're in any one of these categories, it doesn't mean that the NBA doesn't present an opportunity to you relative to other properties, and now you can compare them all to see which is the best. But it does mean it's going to be a tough road because there's other categories out there that you're going to be competing with the NBA or through the NBA that are outside your category but are still doing the same thing you are, which is associating themselves with the league and trying to shout and talk to that same consumer. And it might not be as easy for you because it's less authentic. The fit is just not there as much as it is for somebody else. So to know that going in and to plan accordingly for that is critical. Fear of too much invested. And I'm going to take a drink of water for this one because we're talking the money slide. No pun intended. All right. So now I've decided which properties I want to potentially invest in. Now I have to decide which is the right investment amount. And here's where it gets so tricky, because a lot of the deals that are public are typically big ticket item deals. The Bucks in their patch at $9 million, which after yesterday is probably going up. The Islanders with the $300 million arena naming rights, the Stampede, where we don't have a public amount for them, but that event just finished, you know, in an era or in a year that it was the first of two, it missed the one. will take a second to applaud them. I love that the Stampede went on. I love what it represents and what it means to perhaps the rest of Canada and the rest of the world that these events are starting to take place. So I wanted to throw that in there. But you start to think about all these different opportunities and what is that right amount. The good news is when you have the right data and metrics, you can start dollarizing things and it becomes much easier to do. So if you know property reach or momentum, and you know how many consumers you're able to talk to, you know within your category what it represents, you know the potential impact it can have. So how many people might actually buy you as a result of this thing or feel better towards you. And you have the right market value inputs based on, from our experience, a database of best in class and what we know should be spent. You can start then putting a value on ideas all from one voice, which is a consumer perspective, which is what we're doing. And we're actually going to be launching in October across all properties in North America, a value for each one of those things. So what the value represents is what the property is worth on average. And, you know, there's a range of low and high from a consumer perspective based on everything we just talked to, taking into account engagement, taking into account passion, and taking into account impact. Is it going to drive? You get a number of people, you dollarize those number of people, and it gives you your opportunity value. So again, deals are going to change, assets are going to change things, hospitality is going to get exclusive. There's a lot of factors that are going to, you know, up or down these amounts, but at least it gives you that one common currency to start from a guardrail perspective, plan for what you should be investing and what makes sense from a return perspective. So you can see those amounts there, and we are proud to announce that we're going to be doing that for every property very shortly. So that's the investment side. We're done. We've invested. We're there. We partnered. We're now going to bring it to life, and we're in year 1, or we're in year 7, or we're in year 15. What we need to be doing is demonstrating and understanding how successful we've been and dollarizing from there as well to know whether or not something's working or not. So one of the noise points from a demonstrating perspective is fear of being involved. Again, disregard the acronym. It's a bad attempt at trying to put something into mainstream from an academic perspective. It's not going to hit FOMO levels. But anyways, fear of being involved. Take two instances, the We Charity, which was recently again in the news, and the Olympics, which is in the news right now, and a lot of uncertainty still around the Tokyo Olympics and what's going on there. So when you look at We Charity, all publicity is not good publicity. It was really interesting when we looked at 18 months ago versus in the past 6 months. As soon as this news, this new news came out, the engagement level for We hadn't changed. So just as many people had their ear to the ground listening and kind of wanting to know what's going on, but they weren't as in love, probably obviously to many, with the property. And as a result of not being as passionate, how they felt towards sponsors, which there aren't any anymore, but still being a brand who might associate with We, and yes, it is still an organization that's there. All of those things have fallen. So, you know, from an associative potential, looking at that and thinking about being involved is probably not the best place to be, which brings us to the Olympics and all the news that we're hearing about the Olympics, and specifically in Japan. So we've looked at the Olympics again since 2018, and specifically for Tokyo, and we've looked at it in 18 countries. The country that has the most favorability towards sponsors of the Olympics is today, and was 2 years ago, Japan. Okay, so that is fact, that is true. Now, something we're putting out tomorrow from a content piece, and it is very important that we recognize it, that number has fallen, and it has fallen significantly. In Japan, consumer passion, engagement, following intensity, and partnership impact potential has fallen versus where it once was. It is still the strongest of the countries we've looked at, but it's much lower than what it was. So there is a reality there, but there's two things. And with everything, you got to look at both, right? There's the relative, and then there's the absolute terms. Both are important. If all you do is look at gains and losses and forget about how strong something is in absolute terms, you might be foregoing something that's really strong, but it's fallen a little bit. So you need to look at both before you start your decision making, which is what we've done here. Contending data, one of my favorites, where brands and properties will put out or do a media evaluation and come with these very big numbers. So you take UFC and you take Reebok. Reebok was the outfitter for UFC for quite some time. They were spending, based on public information from what we found, about $11.6 million per year. And based on public information from what we can find, they were seeing dollar values from an investment or media investment perspective in the 2.34 million just for social on one event. $29 million on one event overall for UFC 244 for Reebok specifically. So you're Reebok and you're like, all right, I'm investing 11.6 million. My return, you're telling me a year is like 100 million. Like, that's fantastic news. But for some reason, Reebok decided to leave the UFC, and Venom came in. And from what, again, we know from public information, Venom came in, and there's certainly other variables at play here. And I don't want to pretend to know all of them, but Venom came in at a little bit less than what Reebok was spending. So with all this kind of, anybody who's bought a diamond ring in the past looks at the appraisal value and what they're spending, you're like, I'm getting the best deal in the world. I mean, you need to be careful of that. And in order to know how good of a deal you're getting and what your return is, you need to go beyond what that impression number was or is, and start to really look at things from a consumer perspective. Again, going back to that one lens, one voice. Am I really breaking through? And to what degree am I breaking through it? Am I enhancing my brand opinion and brand favorability? Am I changing how people feel about me? And am I changing the way they're buying me or using me and the actions they're taking towards me? You need to know that to understand truly how successful you are and whether or not you're paying out or the partnership's paying out. That is kind of mainstay of what we need to know from a performance and outcomes perspective right off the bat. So here's a case study where we had the luxury of being able to work with two individual brands, like type categories, not the exact same, but two individual brands who were evaluating their partnership for the exact same property. Okay. Both of them, and I kid you not, true story, came back with, we're spending 1.5 million. The property is telling us that it's worth 3 million. Cut in half, 50. Okay, I get what's going on here. We have 70 million broadcast impressions, 18 million, all those things are laddering up to the $3 million the property's communicating to them. They're paying 1.5. They're like, I must be getting a good deal. It was in the same year at the same time that we measured both of these clients for the same property. What we found is same spend, same return, very different results going from partner one to partner two. Partner one wasn't paying out. They weren't breaking through to the degree we'd like to see relative to our database investing glass, and certainly not to the degree that partner two was. They had been there, by the way, about the same amount of time, so you can kind of remove that variable as well from a continuity perspective. Partner two was just doing much better and paying out. Partner one wasn't. They were spending the same, they had the same impressions, a very big difference in results in terms of how they were doing, which led us and is leading us during this webinar to our learn and optimize stage. Just checking how we're doing at that. We're running out of time, so we're going to go really quickly, but learn and optimize is key because we know that not all activations work, and creative can take something and make it work exceptionally well versus take it down. We know the way, and we've talked about this, to do something right is to go from associative, so just being a part of it, to celebrating with people, to bringing it to life in those ways. And integration of brand and property is critical. Just putting your television commercial up during a game isn't going to do it for you. Demonstrating that you're a part of this partnership and that you're together, that's what's going to do it for you. But with every property, and this is a really important point, the property means something to somebody, and it typically means 2 or 3 different things, but not all properties mean the same thing to everybody. So when we looked at this property, what it was really about from a consumer perspective, why they were there, why they cared, it was about social component, and not social as in bringing people together from bringing friends or family together. And it was bringing friends together, partying, having fun, and the excitement and those types of things. Star power, innovation, familyness, those types of things were at the bottom of the list. So you can actually test ideas to see which is going to resonate. And we tested 3 ideas along those same lines. One was about hyped up and social, one was the game fundamentals, and one was family gathering moments. And the one that did best is the one that delivered on the consumer passion point. So from a planning perspective and understanding and activation perspective, it isn't just about activating, it's about activating around the consumer passion point and why they actually are part of that property. And we actually helped take this brand from where they were before, this is the same brand I showed you earlier, to helping evolve the brand and do better in the second year. So recognizing that we're running a little bit short on time, perfect timing because we're almost at our closer. The way forward is cutting through the noise, leaning into a system that delivers the right data with the right outcomes at the right time and consistent across all properties for your brand, for your category, so that you can truly get rid of all that other ambient noise, everything else going on, and start to think about things from a streamlined perspective that can help you succeed and help you get to where you want to go. And it doesn't matter what phase you're going into and what you're trying to do, that system should be able to work for you all the way through the process. So I am going to leave you with Sponsor Pulse subscription. We have purposely made it very cost effective to sign up for and be part of, and for any one country, get the access to the thousands of different properties and the hundreds of different consumer profiles for as little as $375 a month. There's also a free trial, which I'll throw out there now for 3 days. If you log on and go on to the website, you can be a part of that and just try your way through it and see the value of it. And again, the value in it is to really help simplify what you're about to do and help get you to where you need to go quicker, faster, better through the simplification of things. So with that, I believe Eddie's going to come back on. There he is.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Neil. It's always great to hear your insight on all things sponsorship marketing and the current state of the industry in general. I know we're short on time, but I'm going to ask one of the questions that came in from one of our audience members earlier. Really quickly, Neil, what should brands or properties do if they attempt an activation that doesn't sit well with a designated audience?
I mean, the first step, and they've got it out of the way, if they actually recognize it doesn't sit well, that's the first thing, and they've done it right, is to actually keep their finger on the pulse of whether or not it works or doesn't work. The next thing is, again, to plan and go through those steps of the process, to not throw away the idea, or certainly not the partnership, just because one activation didn't work, but to start considering things like, am I connecting people through this activation or with fans or engaged base through the activation in the right ways on the right passion points. Do I have that right, but am I just not saying things properly or doing things properly to bring it to life? So that's the next step, is to see whether it's the actual idea or thematic of it, or if it's in the way it's being communicated. But first step is exactly what you're doing, which is recognizing that it either works or doesn't, and then going from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Neil. So I'd like to take this time to thank you all for joining us today. Quick reminder, we'll be uploading this webinar to our website in the coming days for you and others to enjoy. You can access that at www.sponsorpulse.com. Also, if you have any questions about today's session or Sponsor Pulse in general, please feel free to reach out to Neil or any of our team members, or also you can send your questions to info@sponsorpulse.com, and we'll be happy to answer those for you. Thank you once again, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, and take care, everyone.
Thanks, Eddie. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, folks.